The night over Iga province felt heavier than usual, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. A cold wind slid through cedar branches, carrying the damp smell of earth and moss. Somewhere far away, a temple bell rang once, its echoes stretching and dissolving into silence. In the darkness beneath the trees, men crouched low, their bodies still, their minds restless. No banners marked them, no armor clinked. These were not warriors meant to be seen. They were shinobi. Hattori Hanzo stood among them, his silhouette barely distinguishable from the shadows. Rain had begun to fall lightly, tapping against leaves and soaking into cloth. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening, not just with his ears, but with his instincts. Every sound mattered. Every pause could mean danger. Around him, his men checked their weapons with slow, deliberate movements. Short blades were secured, cords tightened, small packets of smoke powder tucked safely away. No one spoke above a whisper. Fear was there. It always was. Anyone who claimed otherwise never survived long. But fear had been trained, shaped, turned into awareness. These men had grown up knowing that their lives were tools, meant to be used quietly and discarded without ceremony if needed. A young shinobi shifted beside him, his breath unsteady. "Hansa-sama," he whispered, voice trembling despite his effort to control it. "Enemy patrols have increased. They are closer than we expected." Hanzo nodded slowly. His eyes scanned the dark slopes ahead where narrow paths twisted through the mountains like veins. "They are afraid," he said calmly. "Fear makes men careless. Remember that." Beyond these mountains, Tokugawa Ieyasu waited, cornered, hunted, his enemies closing in. Samurai armies searched the roads and valleys, expecting banners, expecting steel and noise. What they did not expect was a silent path through Iga, guided by men who did not exist in official records. Tonight, the fate of a future shogun rested on shadows and secrecy. The signal came, a soft click of stone against metal. The group began to move. Bare feet and soft-soled sandals touched the ground without sound. They flowed through the forest, keeping distance, never forming a straight line. Rain intensified, masking their movement but chilling them to the bone. Somewhere to the east, a horn sounded faintly. Hanzo stopped instantly, raising his fist. Every man froze. Even breathing seemed too loud. Two shapes appeared on the ridge above. Enemy samurai, lantern light flickering against their armor. Their voices drifted down, careless laughter cutting through the night. They had no idea how close death stood to them. Hanzo's hand dropped. The attack lasted seconds. A shadow leapt upward. A blade flashed once, and the laughter ended in a wet gasp. The second man barely had time to turn before he was pulled backward into the trees, his lantern falling and extinguishing itself in the mud. Silence returned, heavier than before. The bodies were hidden quickly. No time for ritual. No time for regret. They moved again, faster now. The mountains narrowed, forcing them into a tight pass where cliffs rose sharply on both sides. This was the most dangerous point. Hanzo felt it in his chest, a tightening that came only before bloodshed. He gestured, spreading his men wider, eyes constantly searching above. Then it came. A sudden whistle split the air, followed by a sharp cry. Arrows rained down from the rocks. "Down!" someone hissed. Steel bit into flesh. A man cried out once before falling silent. Smoke exploded into the air, thick and choking, turning the pass into chaos. Shadows clashed within shadows. Blades struck armor. Which snapped, men stumbled and screamed. There was no honor here, no duels, only survival. Hanzo moved through it like water, his sword precise, economical. He felt a sharp burn along his side as a blade grazed him, but he ignored it. Pain was information, nothing more. He pressed forward, carving a path, trusting his men to follow or die trying. Moments stretched and broke apart. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the clash ended. The smoke thinned, revealing bodies sprawled on stones slick with rain and blood. The enemy reinforcements were coming. Their shouts echoed from below. "Go!" Hanzo ordered quietly. They ran, through rivers that numbed their legs, through thorns that tore skin, through exhaustion that made every breath burn. Behind them, torches multiplied, flames bobbing like angry spirits. The hunt was fully awakened now. One of Tokugawa's men, pale and shaking, looked back over his shoulder. "How many will die tonight?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Hanzo did not slow. "Enough to let history move forward," he replied. As the first hint of dawn threatened the horizon, the shinobi vanished once more into the folds of the land, carrying with them fear, sacrifice, and the weight of a future not yet written. Dawn did not bring relief. It brought exposure. As the sky began to pale, the shadows that had protected them through the night thinned and stretched, clinging desperately to the folds of the mountains. Mist rose from the valleys below, a cold white breath that blurred distance but could not hide movement. Hattori Hanzo felt the pressure of time settle heavily on his shoulders. Night had been their ally. Morning belonged to their enemies. The group paused beneath a rocky overhang. Water dripped steadily from stone, tapping like a slow heartbeat. Several men were wounded. One clutched his arm, blood darkening his sleeve. Another limped, his breath ragged. Each step an act of will. No one complained. Complaints wasted air. Hanzo studied the land ahead. Roads were crawling with enemy patrols now, their banners visible through the mist. They were closing the net, confident that no force could slip through these mountains once daylight exposed every trail. Confidence, Hanzo knew, was a weakness begging to be exploited. "We changed direction," he said quietly. "They expect us to flee east. We go north through the ravine." A murmur passed through the group. The ravine was narrow, its walls steep and slick. One misstep meant death, but it was also considered impassable for armed men. That was enough. They moved again, descending into the ravine as the sun rose higher. The walls pressed in, stone-cold and wet against their shoulders. The sound of the world narrowed to breathing, footsteps, and the distant echo of water rushing below. Every movement was slower now, deliberate. Fatigue gnawed at muscles, and hunger made heads light, but fear kept them sharp. Above them, voices drifted down. Enemy scouts calling one another, frustrated and angry. "They vanished," someone shouted. "Spread out." Hanzo allowed himself the faintest smile. Vanishing was what they did best. The ravine ended at a river swollen by recent rain. The water was fast, unforgiving. Hanzo did not hesitate. "Cross here," he ordered. "No ropes." One by one, the first man stepped in and nearly lost his footing. Cold shock sucked the breath from his lungs. The current dragged at their legs, threatening to sweep them away. One shinobi slipped and went under, disappearing in a spray of white foam. Hands reached, fingers scraped cloth. At the last moment he was pulled back, coughing, alive. On the far bank, they collapsed briefly, chest heaving. The sound of horns echoed again. Closer now. The enemy had found the river. "There is no more running," Tokugawa Ieyasu said suddenly. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. "They will catch us. Let me draw them away." Hanzo turned to face him, rainwater dripping from his hair. "You will not die today," he said flatly. "Not here. Not like this." "But others will," Tokugawa replied. "Because of me?" Hanzo held his gaze. "Because of history," he corrected. "And history is cruel. Our task is not to judge it, only to survive it." He turned back to his men. "Prepare the ambush." The terrain ahead narrowed again into a wooded slope where fallen trees and thick undergrowth slowed movement. Hanzo placed his men with care, positioning archers above, blades hidden among roots and stones. Smoke bombs were readied. Signals agreed upon with brief nods. Everything was quiet again, but it was the tense quiet before a storm. The enemy arrived in numbers, armor clanking, voices loud with confidence. They advanced carelessly, believing they were chasing exhausted prey. The first explosion of smoke shattered that belief. Confusion spread instantly. Shouts turned to screams as shadows struck from all sides. Arrows fell from above, precise and deadly. Men tripped, stabbed from below, dragged into the brush. For a moment, it worked perfectly. Then more enemies surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. Steel rang against steel. A shinobi fell, struck through the chest. Another took an arrow in the throat, his hands clawing uselessly at the shaft as he collapsed. Blood soaked into the soil, dark and steaming. Hanzo fought at the center, his movements sharp despite exhaustion. Every strike was meant to kill quickly, to buy seconds, not glory. But even efficiency could not stop the tide forever. "Retreat!" he shouted. They pulled back in fragments, using smoke and terrain to break contact. The ambush had cost them dearly, but it had slowed the pursuit enough to open one last path forward. When they finally stopped, hidden among thick bamboo, the group was smaller, too small. No one spoke at first. The absence of familiar breaths said enough. Tokugawa bowed deeply, his forehead touching the ground. "I will carry their names," he said, "as long as I live." Hanzo looked out toward the mountains they had crossed, now glowing faintly under the rising sun. The cost of this escape was written behind them in blood and silence. Ahead lay uncertainty, power struggles, and more war. But they were alive, and sometimes survival itself was victory. As they moved on once more, vanishing into the land that shaped them, the echoes of the fallen followed quietly behind. Unseen, unrecorded, yet forever part of the path that would change Japan. The bamboo forest thinned as the day grew older, sunlight cutting through in sharp, uneven blades. It revealed exhaustion that night had hidden. Faces were pale beneath grime, eyes rimmed red from smoke and strain. Feet dragged despite discipline, and every man felt the weight of those who no longer walked beside them. Hattori Hanzo kept the pace steady, not fast enough to break them, not slow enough to invite death. He measured distance by sound now, not sight, counting heartbeats between distant shouts, judging how long fear would keep the enemy cautious before greed drove them forward again. They reached a terrace hillside overlooking a cluster of farm huts. Smoke curled from cooking fires. Civilians, unarmed, innocent, in the way innocence survived only briefly during war. Hanzo signaled a halt. The choice pressed on him like a blade at the throat. To pass through risked exposure. To avoid meant a longer route, through open ground. A farmer looked up from the fields and froze. His eyes widened at the sight of bloodied men moving like ghosts through his crops. Hanzo stepped forward, palms open, lowering himself slightly. He spoke softly, choosing words as carefully as steps. The farmer's fear shifted into recognition, not of names, but of danger. He nodded once, then pointed to a narrow irrigation trench that snaked behind the huts and vanished into a stand of trees. A hidden path, a gift that could not be repaid. They moved through the trench bent low, water soaking their clothes again, mud sucking at their legs. A child watched them from behind a doorframe, eyes shining with terror and wonder. Hanzo did not look back. Witnesses could become legends or betrayals, and legends were unpredictable. By mid-afternoon, the wind shifted. It carried the smell of horses and oiled leather, enemy cavalry. Faster now, organized. The hunt had learned. Hanzo called his lieutenants close, voices barely audible over the rustle of leaves. He split the group into three, each taking a different line to the foothills. Smoke signals would mark success. Silence would mark sacrifice. There was no argument. Orders were obeyed because they had to be. Hanzo led the smallest group. It was not favoritism. It was necessity. The path he chose was the most dangerous, the one likely to draw pursuit. He wanted the enemy's eyes on him, not on Tokugawa. Every step was a promise made with blood. The trail climbed sharply, opening onto a spine of rock exposed to sky. Arrows came first, testing shots, probing. They scraped stone and thudded into bark. Hanzo dropped, rolling as a shaft split the air where his head had been. He answered with a whistle, sharp and brief. Two men broke left, drawing fire, then vanished. A third hurled a smoke packet that burst with a hiss, white and blinding. They slipped downslope, boots skidding, hands bleeding where rock tore skin. They did not escape cleanly. A spear caught one man in the thigh. He stumbled, breath hitching. Hanzo grabbed him, dragged him into cover, snapped the shaft, and bound the wound tight with cloth torn from his own sleeve. The man's teeth chattered. "Leave me," he said. shame thick in his voice. Hanzo shook his head once. "Stand," he said. The command was quiet, absolute. The man stood. By evening, the forest darkened again. Relief and dread mixed like smoke. Night returned, but the enemy had learned to fight in it. Torches flared in lines now, disciplined, methodical. Hanzo changed tactics. They moved higher, where wind would scatter scent and sound. They crossed scree slopes on hands and knees, sending stones skittering into the void to confuse pursuit. They doubled back twice, then cut across their own tracks through shallow streams. At a ridge crest, Hanzo paused. Far below, fires burned, many fires. Camps forming. The enemy was settling in, confident the net would tighten by morning. Hanzo felt the familiar calculus settle in his chest. Time could be bought only once more, and it would cost dearly. He chose a narrow saddle between peaks and prepared to stand. Not a battle, a delay. Traps were set with rope and weighted logs. Spikes hidden beneath leaves. The men worked with numbed hands and steady hearts. No speeches. No prayers spoken aloud. The wind carried enough. When the enemy came, it was with caution sharpened by anger. The first log swung and crushed 2 men into the ground. Shouts erupted. Arrows flew wild, clattering against stone. Smoke bloomed in fire, and the saddle became a furnace of confusion. Hanzo moved through it, directing, striking, withdrawing. Minutes stretched into something vast and brittle. A horn sounded. Retreat. Not theirs. The delay had worked. The enemy pulled back to regroup, unwilling to bleed further in the dark. Hanzo gathered his men. They were fewer again. One lay still, eyes open to the stars. Hanzo closed them with 2 fingers. They moved before grief could root. Near dawn, they found a shrine half swallowed by forest. Moss-covered stone, a cracked bell rope swaying. Hanzo allowed them a moment there, not for worship, but for breath. The injured man leaned against the wall, alive, shaking. A bird called. The world, indifferent, continued. As light crept in, a runner arrived, one of the split groups. Tokugawa was safe. The message was brief, precious. Hanzo closed his eyes just for a heartbeat. The cost had been paid again, and the ledger was not yet balanced. They set off once more, shadows thinning, resolve hardening. Victory was still distant, uncertain, but the path remained open, carved not by steel alone, but by choice after choice made under the weight of consequence. The war did not end here. It merely changed shape, and they would change with it, as they always had, quietly and without witnesses. The shrine disappeared behind them as the morning brightened, sunlight glinting off wet leaves and turning the forest into a maze of reflections. Fatigue settled deeper now, no longer sharp but heavy, a constant drag on every movement. Hattori Hanzo felt it too, a dull ache in his side where the blade had kissed him hours before, a stiffness creeping into his hands. He ignored it. Pain was a distraction. Purpose was not. They descended into lower ground where the trees thinned and the land opened into rolling fields broken by narrow roads. This was dangerous terrain. There was nowhere to vanish, nowhere to fold into shadow if spotted. Hanzo slowed them further, spacing his men apart, so that from a distance they might look like scattered travelers rather than a single hunted group. Cloaks were adjusted, weapons hidden beneath layers of mud-stained cloth. A cart rattled along the road ahead, pulled by a weary ox. The driver glanced at them once, eyes flicking to their feet, their posture, the way they moved. He said nothing. Silence again became a gift. By midday, heat replaced the chill. The enemy patrols were relentless now, moving with discipline that spoke of experienced commanders. Hanzo observed from a rise as a column passed below. Samurai in lacquered armor, a shigaroo with spears, mounted scouts sweeping the flanks. They were not searching blindly anymore. They were cutting routes, sealing exits. He chose a gamble. They moved closer to the road, not farther from it, slipping into a shallow drainage ditch that ran parallel. When the column halted to rest, Hanzo's group continued, matching pace, hidden by reeds and the angle of the land. The proximity was suffocating. A cough would mean death. Sweat trickled down spines. Flies buzzed, maddeningly loud. A mounted scout peeled off, riding along the ditch's edge. His horse snorted, hooves clopping inches from their hiding place. Hanzo tense, blade ready. The horse shifted, then moved on. Breath returned in a rush that tasted like metal. When the road bent, they broke away, crawling until the ground rose and swallowed them again. Only then did Hanzo allow a pause. Water was shared in sips. Food was gone. Hunger had become another constant companion. No one complained. Complaints would have been absurd. As afternoon stretched, clouds gathered, promising rain. Thunder rolled distantly. The sky darkened, and with it came opportunity. Hanzo altered course toward a river crossing known for its ferry, a choke point the enemy would guard heavily. That was precisely why he wanted it. He intended to pass through not as shadows, but as something else. They reached the ferry at dusk. Soldiers clustered around, wet cloaks pulled tight, bored and irritated. Hanzo watched them, counting, reading the rhythms of guard shifts. Then he did something none of them expected. He stepped onto the road openly. "Hey!" A guard shouted, spear lowering. Hanzo raised his hands slightly, adopting the weary posture of a messenger. "We are farmers," he said, voice rough. "Bandits took our village. We seek passage before the storm." The lie was simple, plausible. His men followed, heads bowed, limping, playing their parts. The guards laughed, crude and dismissive, but the storm was coming and paperwork could wait. They waved them through, eager to finish their watch. The ferry rocked as it carried them across. Rain began in earnest, hammering down, blurring the world. On the far bank, Hanzo did not slow until they were well beyond sight. Only then did he allow himself a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. Night fell hard and fast with the storm. The rain erased tracks, drowned sound. For the first time in days, the enemy lost them completely. They pushed on until their legs threatened to give way, then collapsed beneath an overhang of rock. Rain roared around them, a wall of sound that made even whispered conversation impossible. In the darkness, one man began to shake uncontrollably. Shocked, Hanzo realized, finally claiming its due. He knelt, placed a steady hand on the man's shoulder, grounding him. No words were needed. Presence was enough. Hours passed. The storm moved on. When it finally eased, the world felt strangely clean, as if blood and fear could be washed away so easily. Hanzo knew better. A runner arrived near dawn, soaked and breathless. Tokugawa had reached safer territory. The worst of the pursuit was over. Relief rippled through the group, fragile and disbelieving. Some bowed their heads. Others stared at nothing, already counting the dead in their minds. Hanzo stood apart, looking east where the sky lightened once more. The mission had succeeded, but success felt thin when weighed against the cost. The men who had fallen would not be remembered by banners or songs. Their reward was absence. As they prepared to move again, Hanzo felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, but something heavier. The knowledge that this victory would breed more war, more hunts, more nights like the ones just endured. This was the path he had chosen, and it did not end in peace. They vanished in the land once more, leaving behind only damp footprints that the sun would soon erase, carry with them the quiet truth of survival. That courage often lived in silence, and sacrifice rarely asked to be seen. They traveled in smaller knots now, no longer a single thread, but many, weaving through the countryside with the patience of men who understood that survival depended on restraint. The storm had scrubbed the air clean, and the morning smelled of wet soil and crushed leaves. Birds returned to their songs, unaware of the blood that had soaked the ground not long before. Hattori Hanzo watched the land as much as the sky, reading signs others ignored, broken twigs, disturbed stones, the faint imprint of hooves where none should have passed. The pressure eased, but it did not vanish. Even as Tokugawa's safety became more certain, the world remained hostile. Rival clans did not need a reason to kill men like these. Their existence alone was reason enough. Hanzo ordered a slow westward turn, away from major roads, skirting villages without entering them. The memory of the child at the doorframe stayed with him longer than he liked. By midday, they reached a wooded ridge overlooking a broad plain. Smoke rose from a distant encampment. Enemy, though not in pursuit now. A garrison, holding ground. Hanzo studied it in silence. There was no need to engage. The war did not demand it. The hardest discipline was knowing when not to fight. A messenger arrived from another knot, face drawn, eyes hollow. He brought bad news. One group had been caught during the night. No survivors. The words landed without sound, as if absorbed by the earth itself. Hanzo closed his eyes for a moment, committing faces to memory. Then he nodded once. "We move," he said. "Grief will be paid later, in private." They descended into a ravine choked with fallen trees, moving single file. The injured man from earlier stumbled, breath rasping. Hanzo shifted the pace again, redistributing weight, assigning 2 men to support him without breaking formation. No one questioned the delay. Leaving a man behind was faster. It was also a choice that echoed longer than any pursuit. As afternoon wore on, they encountered patrol, unexpected, close. There was no time to hide. Hanzo raised a fist, then 2 fingers. A feint. Half the group broke right, crashing deliberately through brush, making noise, drawing attention. The rest slipped left, melting into the ravine shadow. Steel flashed. A shout rose, cut short. The distraction cost 1 man his life, but it saved the rest. The calculus was brutal and precise. When they regrouped hours later, fewer again, Hanzo addressed them briefly. "You are not forgotten," he said, meaning the dead, the living, the wounded alike. "Nor are you finished." It was not encouragement. It was fact. They reached a river town at dusk. Skirting its edge as lanterns were lit and doors closed. The smell of cooked rice drifted on the air, sharp and painful. Hunger twisted in bellies. Hanzo allowed a single risk. 2 men slipped into the town and returned with food taken quietly from an unattended storehouse. No violence. No witnesses. The rice was shared carefully, slowly, each grain counted. That night, they slept in shifts beneath a stand of pines. Hanzo did not sleep. He cleaned his blade, oiled it, wrapped it again. The motion steadied him. In the distance, thunder murmured, another storm forming, or perhaps only the memory of one. He thought of Tokugawa moving toward power, of alliances hardening, of the next war already taking shape. The success of this escape would ripple outward, touching lives that would never know his name. Before dawn, the injured man worsened. Fever. Infection. Hanzo knelt beside him, listening to the shallow breaths. There were no healers here, no remedies beyond clean water and hope. The man opened his eyes, focused with effort. "Did we succeed?" he asked. "Yes," Hanzo said without hesitation. The man nodded, satisfied, and drifted into a sleep that did not end. When the sun rose, they buried him beneath stones, marking the place only in memory. Hanzo pressed his palm to the earth, then stood. They moved again, lighter by 1 life, heavier by its weight. By afternoon, the land rose toward familiar hills. Home, of a sort. The paths here were known, the shadows friendly. The danger was not gone, but it had changed shape. Hanzo felt the shift in the air, the way the land welcomed them back, without ceremony. As they reached the outskirts of IGA, Hanzo finally allowed himself to look behind, to measure the distance traveled, the cost paid. The mountains stood indifferent, as they always had. The war would continue, fueled by ambition and fear. Men like him would be called again, asked to walk unseen paths and make terrible choices so others could claim daylight victories. They slipped into the valleys as dusk fell, disappearing into the quiet that had first birthed them. There was no celebration waiting, no reward beyond survival. But in that survival lay something stubborn and unbreakable, a legacy forged not in banners or songs, but in the silent endurance of those who chose to walk into darkness, so others might step into the future. The valleys of IGA closed around them like a long-held breath finally released. Terrace fields climbed the slopes in careful lines, and narrow streams threaded between stones worn smooth by generations of use. To an outsider, it looked peaceful, almost gentle. To Hattori Hanzo, it looked like home sharpened by necessity. These lands had taught him how to hide, how to listen, how to endure. They had also taught him the price of being known. They did not enter villages openly. Instead, they moved along the edges, signaling with subtle marks and bird calls that only locals would understand. Doors opened briefly. Hands appeared with water, bandages, clean cloth. No questions. No thanks spoken aloud. The exchange was silent, efficient, born of an unspoken agreement between those who lived in the open and those who protected the shadows. As wounds were cleaned, the reality of their losses settled in. Bandages replaced blood, but they could not replace voices. Hanzo moved among his men, checking each in turn, his presence steadying. He carried the names of the dead in his mind, repeating them like a quiet ritual. Forgetting would be the final betrayal. News arrived in fragments. Tokugawa had reached safety and was gathering strength. Enemy forces argued among themselves, blaming commanders, questioning decisions. The pursuit had failed. For now, Hanzo listened without reaction. Victory made noise. Survival did not. He was already thinking of what came next. At dusk, they gathered beneath a stand of old trees, trunks scarred with the marks of past conflicts. A council, informal but necessary. Faces turned toward Hanzo, waiting. He felt the familiar weight of expectation settle across his shoulders. "We will not move as one again," he said quietly. "Not for some time. Too many eyes are watching. You will return to your lives, to farms, to workshops, to nothing that looks like war." A few men smiled thinly. Disappearing into normalcy was often harder than facing blades. "And when you're called," one asked. Hanzo met his gaze. "Then you will answer if you can. If you cannot, that is also service." There were nods, relief mixed with something like pride. They had survived something that would never be written down, and they would carry it alone. Night fell. Fires were kept small, hidden. The sound of insects filled the air, a chorus that made the recent silence feel unreal. For the first time in days, some of the men slept deeply, exhaustion finally claiming them. Hanzo remained awake, watching the flames shrink to embers. A messenger arrived before dawn, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. He brought a sealed note. Hanzo broke it, reading by the faint light. It was brief, written in Tokugawa's hand. Gratitude, expressed without flourish. A promise, not of peace, but of remembrance. Hanzo folded the note carefully and tucked it away. Promises were fragile things. Power changed men. He had seen it too many times to believe otherwise. Still, he would hold Tokugawa to this one, if the future allowed. As the sun rose, they began to separate. One by one, men took different paths, becoming farmers, craftsmen, travelers again. Each departure was quiet, almost ordinary. That was the point. Hanzo watched until the last had gone, until the valley returned to its usual rhythms. He remained behind, walking alone toward the higher ground. The wound in his side throbbed now that the urgency had faded. He pressed cloth against it and continued. Pain was easier to manage when there was time. From a ridge, he looked out over Iga. Somewhere beyond those hills, armies gathered, banners unfurled, plans drawn. The escape he had guided would ripple outward, shaping battles yet to come. Lives would be lost because of it. Lives would be spared. The balance was impossible to calculate. He thought of the man who had died, asking only if they had succeeded, of the farmer who had pointed to a hidden trench, of the child watching from a doorway. War touched them all, whether they wanted it or not. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Hanzo descended toward his dwelling, a modest structure that blended into the hillside. He cleaned his wounds properly there, tended them with practiced care. When he finished, he sat outside, listening to the wind move through bamboo. For the first time since the pursuit began, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all. Fear, loss, relief, without pushing it aside. It did not last long. Discipline reasserted itself. Reflection had its place, but vigilance could not be abandoned. The Sengoku era did not reward rest. As night returned, Hanzo stood and faded once more into the shadows of Iga. Not as a commander leading men through danger, but as a guardian of fragile quiet. The war was not over. It had merely shifted, like a blade changing hands. And when it called again, he would answer, as he always had, without banners, without songs, and without expectation of being remembered. Weeks passed, but peace never truly settled. It hovered just beyond reach, fragile as mist at dawn. The valleys of Iga returned to their routines. Fields tended, tools repaired. Children sent along narrow paths, but beneath the surface, vigilance sharpened. Hattori Hanzo felt it in the way doors close a heartbeat faster at dusk, in the way sentries lingered longer on ridgelines. Survival had bought time, not safety. Rumors drifted in with traitors and wandering monks. Warlords argued over blame. Alliances cracked, then reformed with sharper edges. The failed pursuit had embarrassed powerful men, and embarrassment demanded recompense. Hanzo knew how such debts were paid, quietly and often with fire. He resumed training before sunrise, alone at first, breath steady, movements precise. Each cut, each step, was a reminder that readiness doled only when allowed. Soon others joined him, not openly, not as soldiers, but as neighbors helping neighbors, passing along skills disguised as labor, a grip adjusted while lifting timber, a stance corrected while planting rice. The art survived by hiding inside necessity. One evening, a scout arrived breathless, mud-streaked, eyes bright with urgency. Enemy forces were moving again, this time not searching but planning. The target was not Tokugawa now. It was Iga itself. Punishment for defiance. A lesson to be taught. Hanzo listened, face unreadable. He dismissed the scout and walked the perimeter of the valley as darkness gathered. He counted houses, paths, streams. He imagined flames, screams. He felt the familiar tightening return, sharper than before. This was different. Escape would not save them. Only preparation might. He called a gathering after nightfall, small and careful. Elders came. Fighters came. Farmers came. No one wore armor. No one spoke loudly. Hanzo laid out the truth without embellishment. Retaliation was coming. The question was not whether they could win, but how much could be preserved. Some argued for evacuation, scattering into the mountains. Others argued for open resistance, pride blazing despite the odds. Hanzo listened to all of it, weighing fear against hope, loss against survival. When he spoke, it was with the calm of someone who had already accepted the cost. "We do not meet them as they expect," he said. "We do not gather in one place. We become many small fires instead of one great flame." The plan took shape quietly. Villages would empty at the first signal, supplies hidden weeks in advance, paths trapped, bridges weakened. The land itself would fight. Those who could not flee would be guided to places even the mountains struggled to reveal. It was not victory. It was refusal to be erased. The days that followed were a blur of preparation disguised as routine. Children were taught new routes through forests. Elders memorized signals. Even animals were moved, driven into hidden valleys. Hanzo coordinated without commanding, guiding decisions so they felt shared, inevitable. When the enemy arrived, they found silence, empty homes, cold hearts, roads that led nowhere. Then the land began to bite. A bridge collapsed beneath marching feet. A rock slide cut off a detachment. Arrows fell from unseen heights, not to kill, but to harass, to slow, to fray nerves. Fires broke out in supply wagons at night. Sleep vanished. Anger replaced confidence. Orders grew harsher. Mistakes multiplied. Hanzo moved through it all like a current beneath the surface, striking only when needed, withdrawing before the response could form. He watched men lose themselves to frustration, watched commanders argue under rain-soaked banners. He felt no triumph, only grim confirmation. The retaliation did not achieve its purpose. It bled strength in time. Eventually, the enemy withdrew, leaving scars but not ashes. Iga endured, not untouched but unbroken. In the aftermath, the valley slowly filled again. People returned to homes that still stood. They rebuilt without ceremony. Losses were counted quietly. Graves were marked with stones and memory. No songs were written. Hanzo stood once more on the ridge at dusk, looking out over a land that refused to vanish. He felt older now, not in years but in weight. Each success narrowed the paths ahead. Each survival made him more necessary, more hunted. He understood then that legends were cages. To be known was to be targeted. To be unseen was to live. As night fell, he descended into shadow again, carrying with him the unspoken agreement of his people, that as long as he walked unseen paths, IGA would endure. The cost was his life lived between moments, between names. He accepted it without regret. In an age of endless war, that quiet acceptance was its own defiance. Autumn arrived without announcement, slipping into valleys on cooler winds and changing leaves from green to burnished gold. When it came a fragile calm, the kind that followed violence like a held breath after a scream. Fields were replanted, roofs repaired. Life resumed its careful rhythm. But beneath that rhythm, tension remained, coiled and waiting. Hattori Hanzo felt it most at night. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by half-dreams of footsteps and firelight. He woke before dawn each day, walking the perimeter alone, listening to the language of the land. The mountains spoke in subtle ways. The sudden silence of insects, the wrong echo in a ravine, the absence of birds where there should have been many. Nothing escaped notice for long. Word reached IGA that Tokugawa's position was strengthening. Allies gathered. Enemies hesitated. The escape to the mountains had become more than survival. It had become a turning point whispered about by commanders and spies alike. With that came a new danger. Attention. Hanzo understood what followed attention. Requests. Expectations. Orders that sounded like honor but meant exposure. He refused most of them without ceremony. When he could not refuse, he delayed. Time, he knew, was often more powerful than steel. One evening, as mist rolled low through the valley, a messenger arrived bearing a different kind of request. A neighboring province had lost its leader to betrayal. Chaos followed. Civilians were caught between rival claimants. Villages burned not for strategy, but spite. The message was simple. Guide us out. Hanzo weighed the cost. Every movement beyond IGA's borders carried risk. But to refuse meant abandoning people to a war they did not choose. He selected a small group, experienced, disciplined, unknown beyond the valleys. They would move quietly, extract families under cover of night, and vanish again. They left after dusk, moving along ridgelines slick with dew. The land beyond IGA felt harsher, less forgiving. Patrols were thicker, suspicion sharper. Twice they turned back, rerouting when the smell of smoke carried the wrong kind of warning. On the third night, they reached the edge of a ruined village. Charred beams jutted from the ground like broken ribs. Ash clung to the air. Survivors hid in cellars and ditches, eyes wide and hollow. Hanzo knelt, speaking softly, promising nothing he could not deliver. The plan was simple. Move before dawn, no fires, no noise, carry only what could be borne. The first extraction went smoothly. Then the dogs began to bark. Torches flared at the far end of the village. Shouts followed. Panic threatened to unravel everything. Hanzo stepped forward, his presence cutting through fear. He redirected the group into alleys of shadow, sent 2 men to draw pursuit, and waited until the last possible moment before moving himself. Arrows struck stone. A spear grazed his shoulder, tearing cloth and skin. He did not slow. They reached the treeline and vanished, breath ragged, hearts pounding. The cost was paid again. 1 man did not make it. The families did. They repeated the operation twice more over the following nights, each time harder than the last. Patrols adapted. Routes closed. Hanzo adjusted, trusting instinct over maps, listening to the land rather than memory. By the final night, exhaustion weighed like armor, heavy and unyielding. On the return to IGA, they were nearly caught. A cavalry unit cut across their path, forcing them into a ravine too narrow to run. Hanzo ordered everyone down into the stream, submerging themselves beneath overhanging roots. They stayed there, teeth chattering, lungs burning, while hooves thundered overhead. One child nearly cried out. A hand covered her mouth, gentle but firm. When the sound passed, the night seemed impossibly loud. They reached IGA before dawn. The families were hidden, fed, absorbed into the quiet machinery of survival that the valleys had perfected. No celebration followed. Only rest, brief and incomplete. Days later, Hanzo learned that the neighboring province had fallen entirely. Those they saved would never return home. Their gratitude was wordless, heavy. He accepted it without response. Gratitude, like fame, carried expectations. Winter crept in early that year. Snow dusted the higher paths, erasing tracks and softening sound. Movement became easier and harder all at once. Hanzo used the season to disappear further, reducing contact, letting others take visible roles. He trained only those who needed it, passing knowledge like a whispered inheritance. He knew the pattern well. When winter ended, war would surge again. Tokugawa's ascent would draw blades. IGA's usefulness would be remembered, and with memory came danger. One night, standing beneath a sky sharp with stars, Hanzo felt the weight of years settle fully. He had guided men through darkness, shaped battles without banners, preserved lives by remaining unseen. It had cost him simplicity, rest, the comfort of being known. As cold wind moved through the bamboo, he accepted what he had long understood. His life was not his own. It belonged to the spaces between wars, to the quiet moments where choices decided who would see another dawn. When the call came again, and it would, he would answer, not because of loyalty to a lord or hunger for legacy, but because survival demanded guardians willing to remain invisible. The valleys slept under snow. Hattori Hanzo faded into that stillness, carrying with him the quiet burden of an age that could not afford peace, and the resolve to endure it anyway. Winter had hardened the valleys of IGA, turning streams into silver ribbons of ice and making the forest floors slick with frost. Hattori Hanzo moved along the ridgelines, his steps silent, eyes scanning for the smallest disruption in the snow, an overturned branch, a footprint, a glint of metal. Months of evasion had sharpened his senses to a razor's edge. The past few campaigns had left the men exhausted, their bodies carrying bruises and cuts that had long since healed outwardly but lingered as stiffness, aches, and subtle reminders of mortality. Hanzo himself bore the memory of every blade, every arrow, every narrow escape, pressed into his mind like carvings in stone. The valleys seemed peaceful now, almost deceptively so. Smoke curled from chimneys, the soft sounds of livestock filled the air, and villagers moved quietly, wary yet unaware of the shifting dangers around them. Hanzo walked among them, not as a warrior but as a shadow, observing patterns, listening for irregularities. A cart rattling along a snow-packed path, a wolf howling far off, the subtle sound of voices carried by wind. Each was information, each potentially life-saving or deadly. News arrived on a bitter morning carried by a runner, boots cracking the frozen earth. The neighboring province had erupted in conflict again. Rival lords seizing opportunity, villages raised for submission, and innocent families trapped between steel and ambition. The messenger paused, breath ragged in the cold air. "They call for you," he said. "They know of your deeds, and they beg for guidance. Without you, they're lost." Hanzo considered the words carefully, weighing the risks. To intervene would stretch his resources and draw attention, but to ignore would betray the principle he lived by, that those in danger, however far from his home, could not be abandoned if survival was possible. "We move," he said, voice low but certain. "Only the men who can act without hesitation will accompany me. Nothing more." The selection process was meticulous. Each chosen had proven discipline, discretion, and resilience. They trained briefly, reviewing escape routes, emergency signals, and the geography of neighboring hills and forests. Supplies were stripped down to the essentials: food, water, and the tools necessary to navigate, evade, and survive. Hanzo emphasized silence and efficiency, the kind of preparation that allowed them to move like water, adapting instantly to obstacles. Under a moonless sky, they departed. Frost clung to every surface, and the cold bit through clothing and armor alike. Families huddled behind the warriors, eyes wide with fear and wonder, following whispered instructions. The first leg was quiet, cautious. Hanzo led from the front, reading the land as if it were a book, each sound and shadow a paragraph of information. Their breaths rose in visible clouds, fleeting and fragile. Snow muffled their footsteps, offering cover, but any misstep would be fatal. A patrol appeared unexpectedly along a narrow path, torches flickering in the darkness, voices sharp and alert. Hanzo froze, calculating. The families were vulnerable. Confrontation was unavoidable if discovery occurred. He gestured toward a hidden depression in the ground, a small gully that disappeared beneath an overhanging ridge. Everyone dropped low, pressing into the snow. The patrol passed, unaware, and Hanzo guided them silently out of danger. Hours passed with relentless caution. The group crossed frozen streams, trees bending under heavy snow, and uneven terrain that forced careful navigation. Children were guided along handrails of branches. Adults braced against ice and cold, and the men moved with the precision of shadows and moonlight. One misstep would compromise the entire mission. Hanzo felt every heartbeat, every move in the land, and adjusted without hesitation. By the time dawn approached, fatigue had etched itself deeply into their bodies, but the families were still intact. The sun rose weakly through overcast skies, painting the snow in muted gold. Hanzo allowed a brief rest, small and deliberate. No fires were lit. No sound were made beyond whispers. He observed each child, each adult, ensuring all could continue. The responsibility weighed heavily, yet he bore it without complaint. Every life preserved was a defiance against the chaos surrounding them. The journey back toward IGA was fraught with hidden danger. Enemy scouts had adapted, setting traps and patrols along predictable paths. Hanzo split the group when necessary, using diversion tactics perfected over months of evasion. Smoke, shadows, and terrain were allies. Each unit moved independently, yet they regrouped seamlessly at prearranged locations, demonstrating training and trust honed in the harshest conditions. They encountered one final obstacle, a frozen river that had partially thawed, forming a slick, treacherous surface. Hanzo instructed the adults to assist children across first, testing the ice before stepping themselves. A misstep could plunge one into freezing water, exposing the group and inviting pursuit. He led the way, balance impeccable, guiding each person carefully. A slip here could have been fatal, yet all crossed without incident, thanks to patience and discipline. At last, the families reached the hidden valleys of IGA. Exhaustion was complete, yet relief hung like a fragile shield. No celebration followed. Only the quiet acknowledgement of survival, the whispered thanks, the small gestures of gratitude. Hanzo observed them, ensuring each reached prepared shelters, understanding the psychological as well as physical safety required to make survival real. Alone at dusk, Hanzo moved to a ridge overlooking the valleys he had defended countless times. Snow glittered across the landscape, painting it serene yet deceptive. The calm would not last. What would return, as it always did, the movements he had guided, the families he had saved, the men who had followed him. These acts were temporary shields against an unyielding reality. He had carried survival like a blade in his mind, always at the ready. Standing beneath the pale light of an early winter moon, Hanzo reflected on the cost. Lives lost, innocence endangered, and the constant burden of vigilance. He knew that history would not remember him by name. Legends, after all, favored those with banners and songs. He would remain invisible, a ghost shaping outcomes unseen, preserving life where chaos sought to claim it. The valley slept beneath a thin veil of snow. Hattori Hanzo, guardian of the unseen, disappeared into shadow once more, prepared for the next call, the next mission, the next choice that would weigh survival against consequence. Each day, each decision, was a testament to endurance and the quiet defiance of those who walk between wars, unseen but ever present. Spring approached slowly in IGA, bringing warmth to snow-matted forests and the first green shoots to terraced fields. Hattori Hanzo moved through the valleys with the precision of a man who knew every hidden trail, every stone, every whisper of the wind. Months of snow and ice had honed his awareness, sharpening instincts honed by survival and necessity. The land itself seemed to recognize him, guiding his steps, concealing him, offering both protection and challenge. The villages had regained a semblance of normalcy. Smoke curled from chimneys. The rhythm of daily labor resumed, and children played cautiously in open spaces. But beneath this veneer, Hanzo sensed tension, subtle and pervasive. Scouts and rumors drifted through the countryside like autumn leaves carried by a stream. Rivals tested each other, probing for weakness, and word of his previous interventions had traveled. Some feared him, some envied him, and some sought to exploit him. Hanzo gathered a small council at the edge of the forest. The men were lean, their faces etched with the rigors of constant vigilance, the scars of countless escapes. He spoke without flourish. The valleys are no longer quiet. Observation grows sharper, and attention brings danger. We must move carefully, anticipate without being seen, act without hesitation. The men nodded. There was understanding in their eyes, a recognition that the survival of IGA depended not on open battles, but on silence, discretion, and relentless discipline. The skills that had once been taught for evasion were now required for protection, for defense, for survival without honor. A messenger arrived mid-morning, covered in dust and fatigue. The message was urgent. A band of refugees from the north, villages burned by rival lords, sought passage through IGA. They were unarmed, vulnerable, and desperate. Hanzo studied the young messenger, weighing risk against necessity. Intervention would draw attention, potentially provoke retaliation, and stretch his men thin. Yet, ignoring the plea was impossible. Lives were at stake. Select the men who could move silently, Hanzo said. Guide them under the cover of night. Only what is necessary is carried. No light, no sound, no trace. Preparations began immediately. Routes were scouted, safe houses identified, and contingencies planned. Each man selected for the operation had proven discipline and reliability. Their training ensured that even under stress, actions would be precise and coordinated. Supplies were minimal, food, water, tools, but sufficient. Nothing was extraneous. Nothing left to chance. Night fell heavy and still. Snow patches from lingering winter melted into cold streams. Hanzo led the group through ridgelines and narrow valleys, moving with deliberate caution. Families followed, guided by whispers and hand signals. The journey was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional sound of shifting snow or the distant call of wildlife. Midway through the journey, they encountered a patrol. Torches flickered in the darkness, voices harsh and questioning. Hanzo assessed quickly. Confrontation would endanger the families. He gestured toward a depression in the earth, partially hidden by fallen branches. The group ducked low, pressing into the snow and shadow. The patrol passed, oblivious of the life that had just slipped past. Hanzo signaled the group to continue, their path once again unseen. Hours of careful movement followed. The terrain was unforgiving. Frozen streams, steep banks, and patches of lingering ice required constant vigilance. Children's hands were cold, and adults struggled with exhaustion, yet they persisted. Hanzo guided each step, ensuring all remained together. One misstep could compromise the entire operation. By dawn, the group reached a narrow ridge overlooking IGA. The snow was softer here, trees swaying gently in a light morning wind. Hanzo allowed a brief pause. No fires, no voices, only a moment to breathe. He observed the families, noting the children's wide eyes, the adults' taut expressions, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility. Every life preserved was an act of defiance against chaos, a statement that even in a world determined to destroy, survival could endure. The final leg of the journey was the most dangerous. Scattered enemy scouts had adapted, anticipating predictable paths. Hanzo split the group into smaller units, each moving independently, but regrouping at prearranged points. The precision and trust among the men allowed seamless coordination. They encountered a partially thawed river near the valley's edge. Hanzo guided the families across carefully. Adults supported children. Stones were tested for stability, and every movement was deliberate. One slip could expose the group, invite pursuit, or result in injury. Yet all crossed safely, each breath heavy with exertion and relief. Finally, the refugees reached the hidden shelters prepared in advance within IGA. Exhaustion was complete, but relief hung quietly over the group. Gratitude was expressed in subtle gestures, in whispered thanks, in tears unspoken aloud. Hanzo observed from a distance, ensuring each family found safety. Alone, he moved to a ridge overlooking the valleys he had defended countless times. Snow glimmered faintly in the early morning light, the landscape serene yet deceptive. The calm would not last. War never rested. It only shifted, waiting for the next opportunity. The missions he guided, the lives he preserved, and the men who followed him, all were temporary shields against a relentless reality. Standing beneath the pale sky, Hanzo reflected on the cost of survival. Lives lost, innocents endangered, and the constant vigilance required to remain unseen. History would not remember him. Legends favored those who bore banners and sang songs. Hanzo's work was quieter, invisible, yet no less essential. The valley slept beneath the fragile light of dawn, and Hattori Hanzo, guardian of the unseen, faded once more into shadow, prepared for the next call, the next mission, and the next choice that would weigh survival against consequence. Each day, each decision, was a testament to endurance and quiet defiance, the unseen hand shaping the future of a land scarred by conflict but still unbroken. Summer arrived in IGA with sudden heat, drying the snowmelt and stirring the air with scents of pine and earth. Hattori Hanzo moved through the valleys with the measured patience that had become second nature, listening to the wind, reading the land as if it spoke in a language only he could understand. Months of guiding, defending, and disappearing had honed his senses to the point that every sound, every shadow, and every subtle shift in the environment carried meaning. Even the smallest change in the flow of a stream, the faintest crack of a branch, could signify danger or opportunity. Villages appeared peaceful on the surface. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Children ran between homes, and the labor of daily life continued almost as if the past months of conflict had been a dream. Hanzo knew better. Beneath that calm, vigilance never ceased. Enemy scouts, bandits, and opportunistic warlords lurked beyond the hills, ready to exploit any lapse. Even the smallest miscalculation could cost lives, and Hanzo bore that knowledge with quiet gravity. News arrived one afternoon through a young scout, breathless from hurried travel. Rival forces in a nearby province were mobilizing, threatening to overrun villages and enslave civilians caught in the crossfire. They had heard of Hanzo's previous interventions and sought his guidance to escape the coming violence. The scout's words carried urgency, but Hanzo did not react with haste. Decisions of this magnitude demanded calm, clarity, and assessment of both risk and reward. He summoned a council of trusted men, lean and sharp from months of training and survival. Faces bore lines of fatigue and focus. Hanzo spoke plainly. We guide them, but only as shadows. We are not soldiers in this battle. Every step must be deliberate. Silence will be our ally, and patience our shield. We move under the cover of night. Nothing is left to chance. Preparation was meticulous. Routes were scouted, hazards identified, and safe points marked along the way. Families were to travel light, carrying only what could be borne while moving swiftly and quietly. The men selected for the operation were those who had proven capable of extreme discipline, able to respond without hesitation, to act without leaving trace, and to endure discomfort without complaint. Night fell, and the group moved under a sky free of moonlight. Stars offered faint guidance, while the darkness concealed their presence. The air was thick with tension. Every crack of ice, every rustle of leaves, made hearts quicken. Hanzo led from the front, reading the terrain, noting shadows, and adjusting routes instinctively. The families followed closely, relying on whispered instructions, hand signals, and the unspoken trust built over countless operations. Midway, they encountered a patrol moving along a narrow path. Torches flickered, voices carried over the earth. Hanzo assessed instantly. Confrontation would endanger civilians. He gestured to a hidden depression in the forest floor, partially obscured by fallen branches and rocks. Everyone dropped low, pressing into the cold earth. The patrol passed within meters, oblivious to the group, concealed by shadow and snow-matted vegetation. Hanzo allowed a single, slow breath before continuing. The journey continued through treacherous terrain, frozen streams with jagged edges, steep banks, and thick underbrush. Children's hands were cold, adults weary, and the men were tested by both physical exhaustion and mental strain. Hanzo moved deliberately, ensuring every step minimized risk and maintained cohesion. One misstep could have meant disaster. Every sound was measured, every movement intentional. By dawn, they reached a ridge overlooking IGA. The landscape was transformed by summer's heat, streams glinting in sunlight, fields alive with growth and forests deep with green. Hanzo allowed a brief pause, just long enough for the group to gather itself and assess the route forward. No fires, no voices, only measured breaths and silent glances. Each life preserved in these moments was an act of resistance against the violence that threatened to overwhelm them. The final leg was complicated by enemy scouts adapting to patterns, attempting to predict movement through the valleys. Hanzo divided the group into smaller units, each moving independently, but regrouping at prearranged locations. Coordination was flawless, the result of months of discipline and training. They faced one last challenge, a river swollen by early summer rains. Crossing required careful balance, precise timing, and absolute trust. Adults supported children, stepping on rocks, testing the current, moving slowly but surely. Hanzo led by example, moving with steady precision. The river tested every ounce of concentration, yet the group crossed without incident. At last, the refugees reached hidden shelters in IGA. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but relief was palpable. Gratitude was silent, expressing nods, tears, and subtle gestures. Hanzo observed from a distance, ensuring each family found safety. His satisfaction was quiet, hidden behind a mask of control. Alone on a ridge, Hanzo surveyed the valleys he had protected for countless months. The summer sun glinted off streams and fields, a deceptive serenity masking the ever-present threat of conflict. War would not rest. New threats would emerge, requiring vigilance, cunning, and decisive action. Hanzo understood that his life was bound to the unseen, guiding, protecting, surviving, and disappearing when necessary. He thought of the men who followed him, the children saved, the families he had guided, and the countless moments when one miscalculation could have led to death. The weight of these memories settled deep in his chest. History would not remember Hanzo with songs or banners. His victories were silent, invisible, yet essential. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valleys, Hattori Hanzo faded into them, unseen, unheralded, prepared for the next call, the next mission, the next moment that would demand courage, precision, and unwavering resolve. Each day, each choice, each step through IGA's valleys was a testament to survival, endurance, and the quiet defiance of those who acted in shadows, shaping the course of history without ever being known. The heat of midsummer pressed down on IGA, the sun beating against hillsides and casting long shadows through the dense forests. Hattori Hanzo moved among the trees with ease, his steps light, eyes scanning every movement, every sound. The valleys were alive with a hum of life. Birds called, insects buzzed, and streams whispered over stones. But beneath that vibrancy, danger lingered like a shadow clinging to the edges of light. Hanzo had learned to listen for it, to feel it, and to act before it could touch those under his protection. Villages had grown more confident in the safety the valleys now provided, though not complacent. Smoke spiraled from chimneys. Children's laughter echoed briefly between the trees, and the scent of freshly tilled earth filled the air. Yet Hanzo knew that peace in times like these was a fragile illusion. Rival clans still schemed, scouts roamed the hills, and opportunistic bandits watched for weakness. Hanzo's vigilance never faltered. Survival demanded constant attention, whether the enemy was visible or not. A messenger arrived unexpectedly, appearing from the thick forest at dusk. He brought word of a nearby province engulfed in chaos. Lords clashing, villages burned, and civilians trapped in crossfire. They had heard of Hanzo's previous interventions and sought his guidance, desperate for someone who could move through shadows where armies could not. Hanzo listened quietly, weighing the risks. To intervene would stretch his men thin and draw attention, yet to refuse was to abandon lives to certain destruction. He called a council, assembling the men who had survived previous missions, those disciplined enough to act with precision and discretion. Faces were pale, lines drawn from fatigue in past battles, yet all were focused and resolute. Hanzo spoke with quiet authority. We move under cover of night. Silence is our shield, patience our weapon. We are not soldiers in this fight. We are guardians. Every step must be deliberate, every action intentional. Preparation was exacting. Routes were scouted, traps and hazards identified, and safe points for rest or concealment established. Families were advised to carry only what was essential, food, water, and tools needed for survival. The men selected for the mission were those proven to endure stress without hesitation, to act decisively without question, and to disappear without trace if necessary. Night fell, thick and heavy, obscuring stars with clouds and casting the land in deep shadow. The group moved carefully, guided by whispered signals and subtle hand gestures. Frost had long since melted, leaving the forest floor damp and slick. Every step was deliberate, every sound measured. Children clung to adults' hands, their eyes wide, absorbing the tension and quiet discipline that had become a lifeline. A patrol appeared unexpectedly along a narrow path, torches flickering, voices sharp and probing. Hanzo assessed quickly. Confrontation would be disastrous. He led the group toward a depression in the forest floor, partially hidden by fallen branches and undergrowth. They dropped low, pressing into the earth. The patrol passed within meters, unaware, and Hanzo allowed a quiet exhalation before continuing. The group resumed movement, moving like water around the obstacles, guided by his unerring sense of the land. Hours passed in tense silence, navigating streams, uneven terrain, and dense underbrush. The adults moved carefully, supporting the children, while the men who followed Hanzo acted with precision, correcting missteps and ensuring cohesion. One false move could have exposed them all. The air was thick with anticipation and quiet fear, yet discipline held the group together, binding them through shared purpose. By dawn, they reached a ridge overlooking IGA. The valley stretched below, a patchwork of fields, forests, and streams glinting in the early sunlight. Hanzo allowed a brief pause, long enough for the group to recover and assess the route ahead. No fires, no sounds, only the quiet acknowledgement of survival. Every life preserved was an act of defiance, proof that even in a world ruled by violence, survival could endure through skill, patience, and unwavering focus. The final leg of the journey tested them further. Enemy scouts had adapted, anticipating predictable movements. Hanzo divided the group into smaller units, each moving independently, regrouping at prearranged points with seamless coordination. Precision and trust had been honed over months, and this discipline ensured success even under extreme pressure. They encountered a swollen river, fed by recent rains. Crossing required careful balance, precise timing, and absolute trust. Adults supported children, stepping from stone to stone, testing the current before moving forward. Hanzo led by example, moving steadily, adjusting for the shifting water, and guiding the vulnerable. Every movement was deliberate, every choice critical. Despite exhaustion and risk, the group crossed safely, emerging on the far bank intact. At last, the refugees reached the hidden shelters Hanzo had prepared in IGA. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but relief hung in the air like a quiet promise. Gratitude was expressed subtly, in nods, in tears, in small gestures of acknowledgement. Hanzo observed them from a distance, ensuring each family had found safety before allowing himself a moment to breathe. Alone, he moved to a ridge overlooking the valleys, surveying the land he had defended countless times. Summer light glinted off streams and fields, the serene beauty of the landscape hiding the ever-present threat of conflict. Hanzo understood that peace was temporary. War would return. New threats would emerge. Yet the valleys endure because of vigilance, strategy, and the unseen hand guiding survival. He reflected on the cost: lives lost, innocence endangered, constant vigilance, and the endless weight of responsibility. History would not remember him. Legends favored those who bore banners and sang songs. Hanzo's victories were quiet, invisible, but essential. Survival required sacrifice, patience, and the willingness to remain unseen. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valleys, Hattori Hanzo faded into the forest, a ghost among the trees. He was ready for the next call, the next mission, the next challenge demanding courage, precision, and endurance. Each day, each decision, each careful step was a testament to survival, to quiet defiance, and to the shaping of history by those who acted in shadows, unseen but ever present. The heat of late summer settled over IGA, thick and heavy, pressing against the skin and carrying the scent of earth and growing crops. Hattori Hanzo moved through the valleys with quiet vigilance, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The forests were alive with sound, the buzz of insects, the call of distant birds. But beneath that lively surface, danger lingered. He could sense it in the rustle of leaves, in the sudden silence of creatures that had grown accustomed to his presence. The land had long taught him that stillness often carried more information than noise. The villages appeared to thrive under the fragile peace Hanzo had helped maintain. Smoke rose from chimneys, children's laughter echoed between homes, and the rhythm of daily life returned. But appearances were deceptive. Rival factions stirred beyond the valleys, looking for weakness, for opportunities to expand their influence. Bandits tested patrols, and scouts watched the land with keen eyes, attempting to uncover the hidden patterns of Hanzo's movements. Every day demanded awareness. Every step required careful consideration. A messenger arrived one morning, traveling from a neighboring province. His clothes were worn, his face lined with urgency. He carried news of villages threatened by raiding parties, families trapped between forces that cared little for survival or mercy. Hanzo listened, silent, weighing the risks. Intervention would stretch his men and resources, yet ignoring the plea would be a betrayal of principle. Those in need could not be abandoned. "We move at night," he said finally. "Only those trained and disciplined will accompany us. Nothing more. No light, no sound, no trace." Preparation began immediately. Routes were scouted with care, traps and hazards noted, and safe points for rest or concealment established. Families were instructed to carry only essentials: food, water, and tools needed for survival. The men chosen for the mission had proven themselves capable of extreme discipline, able to act decisively and vanish without leaving a trace. Every detail was considered, every potential danger calculated. Night fell, and the group moved under heavy darkness, moving silently through forests and along ridgelines. Hanzo led, reading the terrain as one reads a book, noting shadows and subtle movements that might indicate danger. Families followed closely, guided by whispers and hand signals. The journey was tense, each step deliberate. One false move could compromise the entire operation. The children's small hands clutched those of adults, their wide eyes reflecting both fear and trust in the men who guided them. Midway, they encountered patrol along a narrow path. Torches flickered, voices sharp, questioning. Hanzo assessed instantly. Any confrontation would be disastrous. He guided the group to a hidden depression in the forest floor, partially obscured by fallen branches and dense undergrowth. They pressed low, breathing shallowly, holding still as the patrol passed within meters. Once the danger had moved on, Hanzo allowed the group to continue, moving like shadows around obstacles, undetected. The terrain grew more challenging as they progressed. Swollen streams, slippery rocks, and dense underbrush tested every ounce of patience and skill. Adults supported children over difficult passages, while the men maintained formation and discipline. One misstep could have led to exposure, injury, or death. Yet the group moved with quiet precision, every action deliberate, every decision calculated. Hanzo watched closely, correcting as necessary, ensuring cohesion and safety. By dawn, the group reached a ridge overlooking IGA. The valley stretched below, lush and vibrant, a deceptive calm hiding the ever-present threat of conflict. Hanzo allowed a brief pause, enough for the group to recover, breathe, and prepare for the final leg of the journey. No fires were lit, no voices were raised. Silence was their shield. Every life preserved was a testament to patience, skill, and the careful orchestration of movement through danger. The final leg was treacherous. Enemy scouts had adapted, anticipating predictable movements, attempting to intercept them. Hanzo split the group into smaller units, each moving independently, but regrouping at prearranged points. Coordination was seamless, the result of months of experience and disciplined training. They faced a swollen river, fed by summer rains, its current swift and unrelenting. Crossing required careful calculation, balance, and absolute trust. Adults guided children from rock to rock, testing each step, adjusting for shifting currents. Hanzo led by example, moving steadily, correcting mistakes without hesitation, ensuring the most vulnerable reached the far bank safely. Each step was critical, every movement measured to prevent disaster. Finally, the refugees reached the hidden shelters Hanzo had prepared in IGA. Exhaustion weighed heavily on their bodies, but relief filled the air. Gratitude was expressed quietly in nods, tears, and small gestures. Hanzo observed from a distance, ensuring that each family reached safety and that no trace of their passage remained for those who would seek them. Alone, he moved to a ridge overlooking the valleys, surveying the land he had protected countless times. The summer sun cast long shadows across the terrain, highlighting streams, forests, and fields, all deceptively calm. Hanzo knew that peace was temporary. Conflict would return. New threats would emerge. Yet the valleys endured, a testament to vigilance, strategy, and the unseen hand that shaped survival. He reflected on the cost: lives lost, innocence endangered, and the relentless burden of vigilance. History would not remember him. Legends favored banners, songs, and deeds performed in public. Hanzo's victories were quiet, invisible, and essential. Survival required patience, precision, and the courage to act without recognition or reward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valleys, Hattori Hanzo faded into forest, unseen, a guardian of survival and endurance. He was ready for the next call, the next mission, the next moment that would demand courage, skill, and unwavering determination. Each day, each decision, and each careful step through the valleys of IGA was a testament to quiet defiance, the shaping of history from the shadows, unseen but ever present. Autumn arrived quietly in IGA, brushing the valleys with the muted gold and crimson of falling leaves. The air carried a crispness that hinted at winter's approach, and the forest whispered with the shifting of animals preparing for colder days. Hattori Hanzo moved among the trees with the ease of one who had memorized every ridge, every hidden trail, every natural marker. The land itself seemed to recognize him, guiding his steps, revealing hidden dangers and subtle signs of movement. Every leaf, every branch, every shadow was information, and he absorbed it all with the focus of a predator who knew that even a moment's lapse could cost lives. The villages of IGA had grown accustomed to the fragile peace that followed the winter and summer operations. Smoke curled from chimneys, children's laughter floated through narrow streets, and farmers moved steadily through terraced fields. Yet Hanzo knew better than to trust appearances. Rivals lingered beyond the hills, probing for weakness. Scouts watched silently, and bandits tested the outer edges of the valleys. Calm was a mask, vigilance never ceased. A messenger arrived on a cool evening, breathless and hurried. News had reached Hanzo of another province thrown into chaos. Clans were clashing, villages burned, and families trapped between blades and fires. They had heard of his prior interventions and sought his guidance. Hanzo listened, silent, weighing risk against necessity. To intervene would stretch his resources and expose his men to danger, but to ignore the plea was impossible. Lives were at stake, and he had long accepted that responsibility. He called a council of his most disciplined men. Faces were drawn with fatigue, eyes sharp with focus. Hanzo spoke plainly. We move under darkness. Silence is our shield. Patience is our weapon. We are not warriors in this fight. We are guides and guardians. Every step is deliberate, every action measured. Lives depend on precision. Preparation was meticulous. Routes were scouted, hazards identified, and safe points for rest or concealment marked. Families were instructed to carry only essentials: food, water, and tools for survival. The men chosen for the operation were those capable of acting decisively under pressure, moving without hesitation, and vanishing without leaving a trace. Nothing was left to chance. Night fell, thick and heavy, shrouding the valleys in darkness. The group moved cautiously, guided by subtle hand signals and whispered instructions. Hanzo led in the front, reading the terrain as if it were a living map, noting every shadow, every subtle change in the environment. Families followed closely, their trust implicit in the men guiding them. Each step was measured, each breath controlled. One misstep could compromise the entire mission. Midway, they encountered a patrol moving along a narrow path. Torches flickered, voices sharp and probing. Hanzo assessed the situation quickly. Confrontation would be disastrous. He led the group toward a depression in the forest floor, partially obscured by fallen leaves and underbrush. They pressed low, holding still as a patrol passed within meters. Once danger had passed, Hanzo allowed the group to continue, moving like a shadow around obstacles, unseen and unheard. The terrain became more challenging as they progressed. Streams swelled with autumn rains, rocks slick with moss, and the underbrush grew dense. Adults supported children over difficult sections, while Hanzo's men maintained discipline and formation. One false move could expose the group to discovery or injury, yet the training and careful coordination kept them safe, each member moving in unison, every action precise. By dawn, the group reached a ridge overlooking IGA. The valleys below were a patchwork of fields, forests, and rivers, serene in appearance yet fraught with hidden dangers. Hanzo allowed a brief pause for the group to recover and prepare for the final stretch. No fires, no voices, only silent breaths and careful glances. Every life preserved was a testament to skill, patience, and meticulous planning. The last leg of the journey tested them further. Enemy scouts had adapted, predicting likely paths and attempting to intercept the group. Hanzo divided them into smaller units, moving independently yet regrouping at predetermined points. Coordination and trust, honed over months of experience, ensured success under pressure. They faced a river swollen by recent rains. Crossing demanded careful balance and absolute trust. Adults guided children from stone to stone, testing each step, adjusting for shifting currents. Hanzo led the crossing, steady and precise, correcting mistakes without hesitation. Each movement was critical. Every choice carried weight. Despite fatigue, every member reached the far bank safely. Finally, the refugees arrived at the hidden shelters Hanzo had prepared within IGA. Exhaustion was palpable, but relief and gratitude filled the air in quiet gestures, nods, and tears. Hanzo observed from a distance, ensuring each family found safety and that no trace of their passage remained for any pursuers. Alone, he climbed a ridge overlooking the valleys he had defended countless times. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the terrain, highlighting the deceptive calm of fields and forests. Hanzo understood that peace was temporary. Conflict would return. New threats would emerge. Yet the valleys endured, preserved through vigilant strategy and the unseen hand guiding survival. He reflected on the cost: lives lost, innocence endangered, and the relentless burden of vigilance. History would not remember him. Legends favored banners, songs, and public deeds. Hanzo's victories were quiet, invisible, and essential. Survival demanded patience, precision, and the courage to act unseen. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the valleys in muted gold and crimson, Hattori Hanzo faded into the forest once more, a guardian of life and endurance. He was ready for the next call, the next mission, and the next moment demanding courage, skill, and unwavering determination. Each careful step through the valleys of IGA was a testament to survival, quiet defiance, and the shaping of history by those who acted in shadows, unseen but ever present. When to return to IGA with a quiet inevitability, coating the valleys in frost and snow, turning rivers into silver ribbons and forests into silent corridors of ice and shadow. Hattori Hanzo moved through this frozen landscape with a precision and patience that had defined him for years. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured, every sense alert to the subtlest shifts in the world around him. The cold was harsh, but was also a friend, masking their movements, concealing tracks, and sharpening awareness. In IGA, survival was an art, and Hanzo had long mastered it. Villages nestled in the valleys were hushed under the weight of snow. Smoke spiraled from chimneys. Children remained indoors, and daily labor slowed to match the rhythm of winter. Yet appearances of calm were deceptive. Hanzo knew that rival clans, opportunistic bandits, and enemy scouts were never far. They moved in the shadows, testing for weakness, probing for patterns, always looking for the slightest misstep. Peace, in his experience, was temporary, earned through vigilance and sustained by knowledge and skill. A messenger arrived at the edge of the forest one evening, breathless from travel. He carried news of a province further north in turmoil, villages burned, families displaced, and lords warring without restraint. They had heard of Hanzo's previous efforts and sought his guidance. Hanzo received the news silently, weighing the risk. Intervention would stretch his resources, expose his men, and draw attention from enemies. Yet to refuse would be a betrayal of his principle, that those in need could not be abandoned when survival was possible. He summoned a council of his most trusted men, seasoned by months of operations, fatigue, and discipline. Their faces were lined with hardship, their eyes focused and sharp. Hanzo spoke with calm authority. "We move at night. Silence is our shield, patience our weapon. We are not soldiers in this war. We are guardians. Every step is deliberate. Every action is calculated. Lives depend on our precision." Preparation was meticulous. Routes were scouted, hazards identified, and safe points for rest or concealment mapped. Families were instructed to carry only what was essential: food, water, and tools necessary for survival. The men selected for the mission had proven capable of extreme discipline, acting decisively under pressure, moving without hesitation, and vanishing without leaving trace. Nothing was left to chance. Night fell heavy and dark. The group moved carefully, guided by hand signals, whispers, and instinct. Hanzo led from the front, reading the terrain as one reads a map, noting every subtle change that could indicate danger. Families followed closely, their trust implicit in the men guiding them. Each step was calculated, each breath controlled. One false move could mean disaster. Yet the group moved with the cohesion and precision honed by a month of experience. Midway, they encountered patrol along a narrow path, torches flickering, voices sharp and questioning. Hanzo assessed the situation instantly. Confrontation would endanger civilians. He led the group toward a depression in the snow-covered ground, partially hidden by fallen branches and brush. They pressed low, holding still until the patrol passed within meters. Once the threat had moved on, Hanzo allowed the group to continue, their movement fluid and silent, like shadows weaving through the forest. The terrain grew more treacherous as they progressed. Streams were swollen. Ice made footing precarious, and underbrush entangled their path. Adults guided children across difficult sections, while Hanzo's men maintained formation and discipline. One misstep could have exposed them to discovery or injury, yet training and careful coordination kept them safe. Every action was intentional, every movement deliberate. By dawn, they reached a ridge overlooking IGA. The valleys below glimmered under winter sunlight, deceptively calm and serene. Hanzo allowed a brief pause for the group to recover, regain warmth, and prepare for the final leg. No fires, no voices, only the quiet acknowledgement of survival. Each life preserved was a triumph over chaos, a testament to skill, patience, and careful planning. The last stretch of the journey presented the greatest challenge. Enemy scouts had adapted, anticipating likely routes and attempting to intercept the group. Hanzo split them into smaller units, moving independently yet regrouping at predetermined points. Coordination was seamless, the result of months of practice, discipline, and trust. A frozen river blocked their path, its current sealed beneath a fragile layer of ice. Crossing required careful calculation, balance, and absolute trust. Adults guided children from stone to stone, testing each step, adjusting for shifting currents. Hanzo led with steady precision, correcting mistakes without hesitation, ensuring the most vulnerable reached the far bank safely. Each movement carried weight. Each choice had consequences. Finally, the refugees reached the hidden shelters prepared in IGA. Exhaustion weighed on everyone, but relief and quiet gratitude filled the air. Gestures, nods, and tears expressed a thankfulness that words could not convey. Hanzo observed from a distance, ensuring each family was secure, and that no trace of their passage remained for those who would pursue them. Alone on a ridge, Hanzo surveyed the valleys he had protected for countless months. Snow glinted in the pale sunlight, masking the ever-present threat of conflict beneath its serene surface. He knew peace was temporary. War would return. Threats would emerge anew. Yet the valleys endure because of vigilance, skill, and the unseen guidance of those who move like shadows. He reflected on the cost of survival, lives lost, innocence threatened, and the relentless burden of responsibility. History would not remember him. Legends favored banners, songs, and public acts. Hanzo's victories were quiet, invisible, and essential. Survival demanded patience, precision, and the courage to act without recognition or reward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valleys, Hattori Hanzo disappeared into the forest, unseen yet ever present. He was ready for the next call, the next mission, the next challenge that would demand courage, skill, and unwavering determination. Every careful step through IGA's valleys was a testament to endurance, to quiet defiance, and to the shaping of history by those who acted in shadows, unseen but shaping the course of survival itself. In the end, Hanzo understood that true legacy was not measured in songs or monuments, but in lives preserved, in decisions made with clarity under pressure, and in the silent victories that shaped the destiny of a land scarred by conflict. And so, as snow fell gently across the valleys of IGA, he continued his work, a ghost among the trees, a guardian in the shadows, unwavering, unseen, and eternal.